Hello, Kamile. How are you? How are you celebrating Europe's Day?
Hello, Arthur. Thank you so much. Well, we're in Brussels, so I think we're all outside in parks enjoying the sunshine and Europe's Day. So I think I'll directly share my screen in a few moments, and I'll highlight some of the practices that fashion brands have been using. And from there, I will take you some lessons and takeaways, how you can use these practices, utilize these techniques for your brand. So whether you're an entrepreneur, a small brand, or an SME, and how can you communicate and how can you still support your business and still talk to the relevant and right audience during this difficult time. So let me just share my screen. Perfect. Thank you so much for your patience. So let's reboot again and let's start talking. So to delve into the fashion industry and its practices, you have to be aware a little bit of the pre-COVID-19 context. So fashion was all the time, labeled as the polluter, as the industry that does a lot of environmental damage. And some key facts here are that, fashion is the second largest consumer of the world's water supply. So as you may know, fashion requires, dyeing processes require a lot of water to be consumed. And fashion companies from time to time went to from offering 2 collections per year to 5. So we're consuming more, we're producing more, and this vicious consumer cycle is just, making us consume more, making us want more, and that's how we end up with 85% of textiles going into landfills each year. So I think also it's important to showcase how fashion industry is sort of responsible for all these things, and it has been mentioned a lot of times, and the fact that 10% of world's carbon emissions are also to be related with the fashion industry. Nonetheless, I think it's in these difficult times, fashion industry is one of the first industries to act and to respond, because I think it's not only the fact that the businesses are closing down, it's really difficult for fashion houses to survive, but also the fact that, being such a big industry, you obviously feel a responsibility to act now. So on the screen, you can see a number of brands or fashion groups that contributed to helping in these pandemic times. So whether they contributed in donating masks, or whether they or whether they contributing in making transforming their factories into places where masks or medical supplies can be produced. The question now is whether we can learn from these companies and whether we can take any of the communication guidelines. So if you're a small brand, if you're an entrepreneur, SME, there are things to be done, because if you're small, then it means you're more flexible, and perhaps you can be more sustainable, because you can look at your local supply chains, because you can source locally, and there are things that you can do right now. So one of the things I would start advising you is to rethink your audience. I think in these difficult times, it's really essential not to look at everyone and not to target everyone, but just basically look at how your target audience is impacted by COVID-19 and offer specific suggestions for this target audience. It's not only that you can think of the audience you usually target, but you can also look at the ways how to widen your target market, or perhaps you can choose another target market. So I think in these times, my suggestion is to sort of look at the ways how you can be beneficial with your products, but not necessarily for the target market you were previously targeting. So some of the examples I found recently of how brands communicate, and I think during this time it's really essential that your product offering matches what people really need. So on the left-hand side, you can see Boohoo brand and something like very cozy and very simple to be worn. And on the right-hand side, you can see a brand from Lithuania, my home country, Leslap, who just basically changed their whole collection and started producing like sweats and pajamas, etc. So I think it's really essential that you don't offer something like this, for example, evening gowns or suits during this time. So if you happen to produce something that doesn't really, that cannot be utilized these days, think how can you reshape your product, think how you can reshape your collection, or anything else you do right now, that it can be used right now and that can be sold right now. I think it's in these COVID-19 times, it's really essential to be transparent about your business. And of course, brands were given the possibility to, of course, speak about transparency, about sustainability for, for many years, but this time is really different. So how can you ensure your safety standards are met? And like previous speakers were outlining, it's really essential for customers to know whether health and safety precautions are being used. So have you also checked how do you communicate during this time? Because it's really essential also to remove all those unnecessary buzzwords, because brands are using many buzzwords these times. So even I use so many times, unprecedented times, pandemic and all these things, but people are also tired of the same jargon, of the same buzzwords. So you need to really make your communication approachable, friendly, down to earth. And how can you support your clients' mental health during this time? So I think one of the examples of caring for client safety is, of course, can be utilized by simply, giving away free masks with each order, as some of the brands, have been utilizing. So this is one of the examples. Another example is obviously utilizing technology, and it doesn't necessarily have to be something, really grand. It can be as simple as perhaps, ordering a ghost mannequin that allows you to shoot videos or basically produce lookbook pictures without a person, and it's easy really to crop. Basically, it doesn't have a head, so it's really easy to Photoshop it. So basically you can see that the clothes are hanging on sort of in space, so you don't need to have physical contact with models to shoot your campaigns. So this is one of the examples that I think is useful also for small brands who are thinking, how can we still avoid physical contact but still, get the things done that we have to. As it was also mentioned before, showcase your health and safety standards. So it is useful that we are communicating this in a friendly and approachable manner. So instead of perhaps having, long terms and conditions sort of style, health and safety standards somewhere on your website down below, you can have simple photo showcasing, really behind the scenes. And I think that's where small brands can really tune in, and that's where they can actually, showcase, okay, we're small like you, we're still struggling, we're doing, we're all in this together, without basically saying it, in very capital letters, as they say. So I think second thing that is really important is that you give your clients all the details. So should there be any delays in the delivery, I think it's essential to communicate, because we're all very sensitive during this time. So also be open about safety precautions, if you offer contact-free delivery, disinfection, packaging policies, extended returns. During this time, it's really essential that people can return the goods easily. So think of the simple things even as printing and providing your customer return label package, because I have also experienced myself many times during the pandemic that a lot of brands, they require you to print the labels, etc. So this already creates an additional step that makes it more difficult to return the item, and this is something that you really don't want. So yeah, as I said, ensure easy return options to avoid complaints. And last but not least, you really need to work on customer relationship management, and I think that's one of the key aspects where you can improve yourself these days. So good practices is that when you open a website and you directly see that the brand showcases that, yes, we're open, and okay, this is what we do. So you can have some banners, you can have some information that we're open, and these are the things that are changing. So perhaps estimating shipping time is extended, or etc. Then the third thing that needs to be highlighted is a valuable dialogue. And I have been touching briefly on it, but I think it's really important to strengthen and empower your community. We have been talking a lot about community, about building communities even before. And in fashion brands, it's something that has been also almost like a buzzword, but now it's really the time where it's not about customer loyalty, it's about the community, because loyalty is such a thing that when pandemic comes, it's still difficult to retain your customers because they're saving, they're cutting on different expenditures, but community always remains. So how can you become more relevant, and how can you communicate during this time? So there are a couple of examples that I like, even if it's from big fashion houses, but I think you can also utilize these examples. So on the left-hand side, you can see how Louis Vuitton basically for Mother's Day transformed their website, and they allowed to create e-cards for Mother's Day. So this is something that people, they can create a virtual card and send to their mothers. This doesn't cost anything for the consumer. It's a nice gesture. And during this pandemic time, it's also, like avoiding the handwritten, cards, and just basically being more sustainable, more environmentally friendly. So I think this is something that even small brands can utilize. Just allow your customers to do something on your website that takes a few minutes, doesn't cost your customer anything, but it's a nice way of interacting with you as a brand, and it gives customers some value. And on the right hand side, you can see examples of Louis Vuitton shop that they recently redecorated with some positive signage, and they collaborated with one of the very famous artists. So I think this is something also to showcase that, okay, we want to share the positivity. We want to basically be in this together with you. Some other important messages I want to highlight: that cold outreach don't do cold outreach. Even before, I was telling my clients and everyone that I worked with that it never basically works. But during this pandemic, it's really essential that you personalize every message. And if you're looking for a job, or if you're looking for new business partners, if you're looking for a supply chain, I don't know, if you're making any changes in your supply chain and you're outreaching somebody else on LinkedIn, on social media networks, please do the research, and please try to make messages really, really relevant, because obviously, since everything is shifting online, we have more and more interactions, and these interactions now have to be even more meaningful than before. Then the second point is that you have to stop targeting everyone. And I know many brands still think they have really like niche target audience they have defined, but now is the time to really think who is of use whilst using your products. Also, something is that you have to really be careful with jokes, and I think some of the brands try to cheer their customers up and try to use, jokes are related with, masks or pandemic or the spread of the virus. But the key message here is that, you don't really know everyone's humor sense, and it's really difficult to make it really, to the point. So I would say avoid. And last but not least, I would say avoid all of these buzzwords like we're all in this together, because it just doesn't feel authentic. So if you can express the same message but in different words and something that's really relatable to the brand, please do. And now for some content opportunities, very briefly, I think what you should utilize is live streamed events with Q&A. So it can be really useful if you can provide your community, your customers, with some live streamed events where they can meet, I don't know, opinion leaders, coaches, influencers, you name it, but they can connect with those people. They can have a chat and they can feel, connected. So it's nothing to do with direct selling, but something more like talking, communicating, because people are spending their time alone in their home. So you need to make this this connection with them. Second thing, that a lot of fashion brands were talking about virtual fashion shows. It's really difficult to translate physical show into into a virtual format. So obviously it has some negative drawbacks, that it's really difficult to showcase the whole emotional connection and the whole idea through virtual means. But at the same time, virtual fashion shows can really can be accessed by many more people. And I think brands, especially big brands and corporations, they have tons of followers, they have really big community. But the problem with them is that they have previously included only a small fraction of their community to fashion shows. So I'm hoping that with these virtual changes, with the technology, that brands will now have to utilize, there's no other way, that fashion will become really inclusive. And I think it's important also to use some supplementary materials, and you can you can distribute PDFs, blog posts related to topics such as self-isolation, mental health, etc. But make sure when you do those things, make sure that you do in depth and in quality, because customers will be looking for really good, well-structured and useful content. So if you do this, make sure you do all the research. And lastly, I think it's essential then to rethink your business model. Brands were really pressed to rethink their business model, and they had to, of course, shift everything online. They have to make their production efficient, and they have to think, okay, which stores we will reopen after pandemic, which ones we will close, how can we, maybe there's something else that we want to do. Maybe you're an Uber app, but then suddenly you have to realize that you will have to deliver not only food from restaurants but also food from the supermarkets. So these are essential questions that you have to ask yourself as a small business brand. And you have to really look at your product. And I think circulation, regeneration, upcycling is the answer here. And I've been talking with some designers that have been even doing this before the pandemic. And now it really pays off, because they can easily take their previous collections and some leftovers from the stock that hasn't sold, and they can basically tune and upgrade these old previous collections, and they can make those garments while not using any additional material. So I think it's really important then to be creative and to think, okay, how can I not only be sustainable for the word sustainable, but it also helps me to create my garments, to create my products in a more efficient way. So if we're talking about sustainability, you really have to mean it. And just, I think a lot of brands obviously have been talking about sustainability, but really to be fully sustainable, as you can see in the graph, there's so many stages. And in each of the business sphere, you have to be sustainable, from production to supply chain to back office to cutting the travels, etc. So I would advise small brands, entrepreneurs, not to play with these brands, or to at least say what are the aspects of sustainability that you're utilizing. So because you can be sustainable 100% in all of the ways, and even if you are, there's still potential to go deeper into sustainability. So I would say maybe find different vocabulary, and maybe really sit down during this time and think, okay, which are the aspects that I can really make more sustainable. And I think it's essential now to rethink supply chain models, and this is the example of H&M supply chain supply chain. So I think small brands and small businesses now can really utilize their flexibility. And since they're small, since they're probably, most of you are probably based in Europe, you can think of, okay, how can I make my supply chain based around where I'm physically present, so I can control more of things. So I would say be more local. And lastly, so I'm happy to connect with all of you. So I will be also giving as a present to combat these times, 3 30-minute consultations with me. So do not hesitate to email me or connect me if you have any questions regards marketing, public relations, etc. So thank you.
Thank you, Kamile. It was really interesting, and I think it's very actual and inspiring especially for the brands from textile industry, from the fashion industry. And I know many of them, and some of them are actually in the Rockit conference chat on Telegram. So please join the chat, because this is where participants could follow up with you. And yeah, hopefully I see you next week in the Brussels Park.
Hopefully, absolutely. Thank you so much, Arthur.
Discussing the conference and how it was. And thank you for the free consultation for the free Rockit participants. Actually, we have a goodies page, and we will share it with the 1,500 participants who registered for Rockit conference. And if they will not be taken immediately after this presentation, in the Rockit conference, we will send that in the newsletter as well. Thank you as well, and have a great Europe's Day.
Thank you. Same to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.